Hello, listeners. This is Rick Miller, RD, here back again for another exciting episode of the Miller Hour podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and for all the other times you've listened to any of the episodes on our channel. As always, if you like the content that I'm providing to you, the guests that I'm speaking to, please consider liking and subscribing and sharing this content with somebody who might find it useful. And do comment down below if there's somebody that you would like to see on the channel in the future, or there's a particular topic that you would like me to cover with another guest. But in this episode today, I've got a returning guest. All the way from 6 months ago, we had the amazing Andreas David Christou, who was going to introduce himself in a minute. But last time that Andreas came on, he talked about all the areas of expertise around mobility training, different ways to approach functional training. We even covered areas of quantum as well, and how movement actually translates into things like piezoelectricity. So I highly recommend you check out our previous episode, which is episode 15. And listen to that as a pre-warm-up for this session. But let's introduce Andreas and get him on. Hey, Andreas, how are you doing?
Hey, Rick. Thank you so much for having me back on the podcast. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you, man. I mean, you're just so knowledgeable. So it's a real treat for myself and obviously our listeners to have you on here and share your knowledge. But for those people who've literally tuned into this episode and haven't had a chance to watch the previous one, could you give us a 1-minute overview of who you are, what your expertise in, and what you're interested in talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a movement specialist. I specialize in helping people move better, be more pain-free, and improve their range of motion and their function as human beings overall, from athletes to elderly or any point in your lifetime. And I'm also a nutritionist as well. So I have a very broad and holistic approach when it comes to health, because it's not only about movement, right, or nutrition, but it's also about lifestyle habits. So I'm very enthusiastic about lifestyle interventions in combination with my movement and my nutrition coaching. And everything that I put out there on social media, I also practice it myself. So I always practice what I preach, and I really love and believe in this lifestyle, because I fundamentally believe that we need to incorporate all pillars of health if we actually want to be healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, that's so succinct and absolutely true. And you do practice what you preach. And for those who've never come across Andreas, do check out his Instagram and YouTube channels, which will be in the description below. And also, as just a point here, Andreas and I do work together to offer various different packages in terms of online coaching. So I will be mentioning this again later in the episode, but there is a link to that page down below in the description. Do check that out if you're looking to transform your life, your movement, your nutrition, and your health, and see how Andreas and I can help you with that. But without further ado, let's get into one of the major topics of today, which is stretching, tightness, movement. And I can say this as somebody who's got a long history of martial arts. I've done 25 years of karate, and stretching is something that's synonymous, I think, with lots of different sports, particularly with martial arts. The sort of rigors of crazy stretching protocols. I can remember senseis pushing people down into various stretches, over and over again. And quite often, I would say my flexibility didn't usually change that much over time, but I would love to hear a little bit more about this, Andreas. I think there's some fallacies here around stretching that people don't realize. You are, doing this over and over again and probably repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, a great question, and well elaborated as well. It's very much seen in all sports, right? It's believed that doing some stretching before and after exercise is good for, preventing injuries and warming the body up nicely, which it can do to some extent, because you are putting those tissues in that full range of motion. But here's where the but comes in. Mm-hmm. So the problem is that when we overstretch tissues without applying the strength to it, so meaning that we are passively stretching or static stretching, and we just flop into a position, or we are forcing ourselves into a position, what happens is our brain gets a signal that, hey, what we're doing is actually not very safe, because now we are putting our tissues under great loads where it feels that we are out of control. And when the brain and the body feels out of control, as a protective mechanism and a survival mechanism, it tightens us up even more. So in a pursuit for us to try and improve our mobility and our range of motion, we end up tightening our tissues due to the body's survival mechanism and the stretch reflex, which the body has innately inbuilt to itself. So when you overstretch a tissue very quickly, very rapidly, or you do it in a passive manner where we are not applying strength through that full range of motion, those tissues now become tighter than before. It might give some temporary relief in the moment, and this is why it feels so good while you're doing it. And actually, it's great for the blood flow, and there's no denying on that, doing the stretching. However, there is no long-lasting changes, and this is where I say to people, if what you're doing isn't sticking, why are you doing the same thing every day and expecting a different result? And so what we actually need to do is we need to understand how does the brain operate and how can we access those greater ranges of motion in our muscles without actually shutting our body down. So we don't want to work from the outside in, we want to work from the inside out, understanding how our nervous system operates.
Interesting. So we'll maybe get into the detail of that in a second, and how somebody might approach this kind of inside out approach rather than the outside approach in, which is exactly what, you know, my experience was over decades of stretching for higher kicks or whatever mobility I was trying to do. But I guess one question I wanted to ask, which is probably a basic one, so do forgive me, is why is there this obsession around stretching? So for instance, I was walking through London the other day, and I actually saw in central London a dedicated stretching studio. You know, kid me not, it was called Stretch Lab, and it's literally its sole purpose is to stretch people. And is it due to this kind of this relief that people experience, this kind of almost like a sort of endorphin rush? Why is it that people are obsessed with stretching? Because there must be a kind of a trade-off somewhere where there's no benefit to stretching, or is this a myth that people feel that the more stretchy you are, the better you're going to be at a certain sport? Where has this come from, do you think?
Yeah, so that was a multifaceted question, from, to performance all the way to just being pain-free or feeling good, like to a regular desk worker, for example.
Yeah.
So a person, let's say a regular person who is a desk worker and they just want to feel good, they have this idea in their head that, because of stagnation of sitting and stiffness due to sitting and weakness in the muscles and also lack of movement in general, they have this idea that because of what we've been told over the years, that we just need to stretch a little bit, left and right, and we need to hold the positions, and we need to try and force ourselves to get into positions. And you notice that when you go to gyms, you notice how people prepare themselves before the training. And it's very, very easy to observe that people don't have an understanding about working from inside out, but only from the outside in, trying to force the body. Right. And so basically it depends on when you mentioned about the Stretch Lab, it's not always a bad thing, right? So some individuals may benefit from actually doing some temporary stretching for pain relief, but it doesn't have a long lasting effect. And this is where we need to try and understand what type of stretching it is, because if it's passive stretching where you are collapsed in a position, let's say you're trying to stretch your hamstrings,
yes,
and you are folding over from the hips and you're keeping your legs straight and you're trying to touch the ground, let's say, and you just flop your hands down to the floor and you just surrender. Now your hamstrings, yes, they are getting longer. Yes, they are getting longer temporarily. And if you combine that with the breathing, the nervous system can relax and you will eventually touch the floor. However, they will tighten very much up afterwards because the body doesn't like what you're doing. But it does feel good in the moment. It does provide this temporary relief. And what you just said, logically, it does feel better because temporarily it does give the relief. So it works temporarily, but it doesn't last. So if we actually want our efforts and our time that we put in to be, to give us a higher return on investment, that means we actually need to be doing things that we are working with the nervous system instead of just working, with the muscle and with gravity.
Absolutely.
And so like when you mentioned about the performance aspect of things as well, again, it's because of this lack of awareness or lack of understanding how the body actually operates. It's just this idea that, you know, if you just prep the muscles through the full range of motion by passively going into the stretch, it prepares the muscles. Well, actually, no, it makes them less prepared, because for athletic performance, you actually want to be tighter. You don't want to be looser. Because basically, when we think about the body as a chain, or when we think about the tensegrity of the body, it means that the body is a chain, and if the chain is well functioning and is well balanced, so it's loose in the right areas and tight in the right areas, when you move one limb, then it's going to assist all the other limbs to move. But if you're too loose now, you are going to have a delay in that response. Let's take sprinting as an example. If you stretch too much before a sprint now, if I go to fling my arms forward to assist my lower body to move at the same time, if I'm too loose, that connection is going to be very much delayed. So I'm not going to be the fastest sprinter. And I'm also probably more prone to injuries as well.
I see. So it's getting that right balance of,
yeah.
you know, to flexibility, but also preparing the tissues with some tensile strength and some kind of stiffness in there, so that you get this efficient transfer of force through the tissues. Interesting. Absolutely interesting. So I guess the next question is that if somebody is doing this kind of passive sort of stretching routine, you know, they've been given the occupational health one sheet of paper, you know, do these things at your desk, or, you know, touch your toes during the day. What would you say is a better approach to be thinking about this? And maybe is there some particular ways of thinking about movement or this kind of general sedentary behavior we have during the day to prevent this problem in the first place?
Mm-hmm. So this is gonna sound very like simple and easy, and it is. So basically,
we like simple.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is. It's about not overcomplicating it. So every single stretch that you have ever been aware of, you can turn it into a functional exercise, or you can actually turn it into a dynamic stretch, or a stretch with is having strength involved. When the strength is involved, now you are doing it with conscious participation and awareness, going through that full range of motion with your will and with your strength, and you are not just surrendering into the position, which makes a massive difference. Now, this is how we program the muscle to become more relaxed from the inside out, rather than forcing it from the outside in. And so how do we do this? Let's take something as an example. Let's take like a squat as an example. If we squat all the way down and we are just passive, there's no problem in that. But eventually, over time, we are going to become very loose on the hip area and on the knee area, okay? And that's probably going to cause maybe a little bit of SI joint pain. But to be able to fix that, what can we do? We can arch our back, we can push our belly forward, we can come a little bit higher, so we're not fully sunk in the bottom of the squat, but we're basically almost at the full range of motion. Now I'm not passive in the squat, I'm active in the squat. And just that simple difference makes all the difference in how you teach the muscle how to function. And, you know, this goes back to what I was telling you about the performance, about how do we know that the muscle is optimally loose and optimally stiff enough to be at the highest performance. And that is by allowing the body to have its own innate intelligence to run the show. So by us showing through strength to the movement that what we are doing is safe, and it will by itself, through that full range of motion, which we have shown it in the exercise, let's say going all the way down in a deep squat and standing back up. If you do it with weights, for example, that's one of the best ways to show to the body of how the quadricep muscle should function. If we take the quadricep as an example.
Interesting. So it's as you say, it's teaching this kind of natural range of motion and movement, rather than, as you say, flopping into a predetermined stretch or whatever, which is probably totally unnatural anyway, as you say. And I imagine there's a highly personalized element to that then, I would imagine as well, because people have different injuries, different areas of perceived tightness around their body. So I think you probably have all sorts of different ways to manage this in people. You know, you've just given one of them.
Yeah, and for example, if you take strength training as a very good way to observe this, is you can strength train with half range of motion in exercises, or you can strength train in full range of motion. So if you always squat halfway down with the barbell, you will never improve your your squat depth because you never squat all the way down, and you will never improve the quad mobility or the hip mobility and so on. And so if you take just that simple exercise of a squat in a gym, you can apply that to every single exercise, such as chest. If you're doing dumbbell bench press, if you're only going halfway down, you are never fully stretching the chest. You are never showing to the brain that you have control over that full range of motion. So therefore, your chest is never going to be mobile and will always be stiff. But if you train through full range of motion, you go all the way down, you feel the stretch on the muscles with the load, now you are reprogramming your body and your nervous system, showing that you have control over what you are doing. So it will grant you access, because the nervous system is like a controller for mobility and strength. The more you show it that what you're doing is safe, the more access it can give you. All the strength that you ever can imagine and all the mobility you can ever imagine, you have inbuilt within you. It's all in your brain. You don't acquire it, it gives it to you.
Interesting. Yeah, and if you think about it that way round, as you say, you've already got the blueprint inside of you. You just need to kind of unlock it, as it were, like a video game or some sort of achievement. That's really interesting. And also it makes me think that this kind of strength through a longer range of movement is probably a pro. If I've sort of slagged off my martial arts in terms of the way that they approach stretching, but then if I think about some of the other modalities that maybe dance or other martial arts and other different sports do, they emphasize strength and control over a range of movement, whether that's doing forms or a dance or whatever, very slowly, and maintaining that control. And I'd imagine that kind of feedback to the brain is incredibly beneficial to get that kind of strength through a range of motion, which is interesting. Okay, sticking with this, the training state for a second. We've talked about maybe some of the myths and the fallacies around flexibility and how people should approach stretching. If we were to talk about then the ideal time to do this, to actually train during the day. Again, if I think about, I recollect on the sorts of information I've been given over the years as a practitioner, both as an athlete and as a dietitian, I've had everything from people should train first thing in the morning, the best time to train is in the afternoon when your joints are warm. You should always train, after you've had caffeine, or you've done this, or you've after a meal, or maybe some people say it's fasted. What's your perception on this, Andreas? Like, when is the ideal time for people to train, and in what state?
Well, based on the circadian rhythms of what we understand, circadian rhythm is the body's biological clock, and we have many clocks in the body, but we have a master clock in our brain, which is called the SCN, which controls all the other clocks. And every single system in our body, including our muscles, gut, heart, and organs, they all have their own clocks, right? And they all get their own feedback based on certain circumstances. However, the one in the brain is mainly impacted by light. And so this is why taking care of our light environment, about our sleeping and waking cycle, can also determine a lot about our gut health, our muscle health, and so on. And basically our entire system, because everything works together, and nothing in a way works in isolation in the body, right? And so if we understand that every single system has its own clock, then we want to understand, okay, what is the most optimal time for that system? Or when does it function at its highest? When they have looked at muscle in terms of, the system itself and the clock, they have found that the mitochondria have the highest output in the afternoon. And then it also goes in line with the fact that, strength, when they have studied strength, people have the highest amount of strength also in the afternoon. So that would go hand in hand with the clock mechanism of how the mitochondria are firing, and they are having the biggest output. They are producing the most amount of ATP in the afternoon time. However, this clock has been shown to be able to be shifted based on our habits and behaviors. So if we choose to actually exercise in the morning time, and we do this for a prolonged period of time, let's say over a period of 6 weeks, we can actually shift that clock of the mitochondrial output, and we can make it the highest in the morning time. However, I do not necessarily know whether this has implications on the muscle health, and you see by shifting that clock. But with my personal opinion, it doesn't matter so much when you train, because for me, what's most important is when can you actually get it in the day based on your lifestyle. So for example, if the only time of the day is to train in the morning, and even though the literature says that the most optimal time to train based on, you know, the clock genes and the strength output is in the afternoon, it's okay if you train in the morning time, because that would be the only time for you to be able to partake in the activity, and it's better for you to do it than rather not to do it and to skip, because consistency is everything when it comes to seeing results over a prolonged period of time. And we know that if you just try and aim for perfection, you are more likely to lead to, you know, failure and not continuing for a long period of time. And I'd rather you be good rather than perfect.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of pursuit of progress rather than perfection, I think, is absolutely something that a lot of trainees out there who are listening need to take stock of, because people are always searching for the perfect program, the perfect set of exercises, you know, the perfect diet, etc., etc., etc. And actually, as you said, it's the one that you can do consistently that's probably the most important. But as you say, there is some nuance in this, you know, based on physiology and the clock genes. And interestingly, weirdly enough, in the afternoon is probably when the most world records are set, to be honest, you know, which may be due to this kind of clock output. But I can say, again, from my own experience, having done some genetic testing many, many years ago, that actually, I think my profile showed from recollection that best time for me to train is actually in the morning, weirdly enough. And if I think, again, just before I even did that, when did I historically used to feel best? It was actually in the morning, weirdly enough, for training. And I used to force myself to train at night because that's when the dojo would be open. But I never used to train as well, and I would definitely more likely to get injured. So whether that was subjective because I'm feeling tired, I've had a long day, etc., or it's because of the clock genes, I'm not entirely sure. But it is interesting how these things do impact us. And I guess that leads on quite nicely to something that we talked about last time, and definitely the amazing Dr. Jack Kruse talked about when he came on and spoke to myself about the impact of artificial light on the skin photoreceptors, which you mentioned before, obviously one being the SCN in the back of the eye, and obviously on our skin we've got loads of them, and you've got a beautiful tan, so clearly you've been doing the natural light. But in terms of where you should be training, I think this is probably also going to upset a few people as well. Indoor versus outdoor, what are the benefits, what are the pros, what are the cons, where should people be training for maximal health and benefits? I would say let's start with health, and then maybe thinking about performance as well.
Yeah, so if you're talking from a purely health perspective, then for sure outdoors is the most optimal place to be, because we have evolved, you know, evolutionarily over thousands of years to be outside. Only very recently, you know, we have built these cubes where we basically live in and isolate ourselves from the natural light. And also, you know, we have now the windows, which basically they alter the light frequency. So now that the light that we receive is not the full spectrum light anymore. And this is having huge implications on our biology, because we are light beings, we are light-driven beings. And with this, we can be shown this through the fact that our circadian rhythms are so essential for so many other systems of the body. And so if the circadian rhythms drive the show of other systems, then that means that we need to pay respect to the outdoor environment. But that does not mean either that we have to abuse the outdoor environment. We have to be very logical and use common sense. When we look at animals, for example, when they are outside the entire day and they are grounded the whole time, unless they are flying, if they are birds, basically they go in the shade when they've had enough sun. But as human beings, what we do, we slap on sunscreen, we wear sunglasses, and we stay in the sun 8 hours, 9 hours. We defy the laws of nature. Now, this is a huge problem, because now we are altering the way that we receive the light due to these things that I just mentioned. And also, that does not mean that allows you to be able to do that. And so basically we have to use common sense, especially if we are living in a warm country like myself living in Cyprus. Now we have 40 degrees outside and it's probably, UV index 11 to 12. And so when the UV index is so high, you need to be cautious because you don't want to burn your skin. You want to be, acclimatizing your body gradually. And so this is why I tell a lot of people, if they do want to exercise outside, you can do it in the morning time if you don't want to do it in the middle of the day or in the afternoon light, because in the afternoon light, the UV index can still be very high unless you are training close to sunset. And that's not really ideal, especially for circadian rhythms, because you want to be prepping your body for relaxation and restoration towards sunset time. And so if you want to be training outside, you want to be doing it in the shade. If you want to do it, in the afternoon, or you want to be doing it like somewhere. But if you're somewhere like in the UK, there's like absolutely no excuse why you shouldn't be doing it outside, because there's probably going to be some clouds. It's not always 100% sunny, and you can do it in your back garden. You can do it on grass, and then you can be grounding at the same time. So there's so many benefits about doing it outside versus indoors. Now I can talk about all the reasons why indoor training is bad for you, and then it makes sense why outdoor training is, of course, the most ideal scenario. But if indoor training is the only thing you have access to, then it's not really a problem as long as you're living a circadian appropriate lifestyle, which I will get into.
Yeah.
So do you want to jump in?
Yeah, please. No, dude, I was about to say, please tell us, what from your perspective, what is living an ideal circadian lifestyle? Because you will get, as you say, people who are saying, well, I need this piece of equipment, or I like to train in this particular gym, or people go to gyms, just because it's it's got other things in there that they might need, like a sauna, maybe it's got a cold plunge, maybe it's got, crash facility so they can actually train, when the kids need managing or whatever. So I can see the argument, but as you say, let's talk about the dark side of, maybe training in gyms that people haven't really thought of, and also think about, how can you live more optimally circadian wise?
Yeah. So now, as you're aware of, the majority of individuals spend the majority of their time indoors. And we're going from an indoor environment, our house, with most of the times blue lights, if you're not aware about circadian rhythms. And then you're going in your car, which is a closed box. And then you're getting to work, which is another closed box. So you're never seeing actually real light throughout the day, especially if you're sat behind windows and your windows are not open in your office or at home. And the natural light is so important for setting our circadian rhythms and keeping us healthy in general, and keeping our clocks on the right track so that they know that what time of day it is based on the light and the temperature and so on. And if we are living an indoor lifestyle, and then eventually after our work, we are going to the gym, which is another indoor space, now we are basically living, almost 100% of our time indoors. We are never touching our bare feet on the ground. We are under artificial lighting. And because we do this, we reach a level of toxicity in the body. Maybe this toxicity doesn't actually exist, but I like to call it toxicity because you do actually get physical symptoms. So once you are living a lifestyle which is very rich in artificial blue light, which is all modern lights these days, even car lights, when you look at them, they're extremely white and harsh and blue. It's very hard to drive these days, in the nighttime. And then you also are close to non-native electromagnetic fields, which are, the Wi-Fi's, the phones, the tablets, basically everything electronic is emitting non-native electromagnetic fields. And also blue light is a non-native electromagnetic field. And so basically, when this happens now, we are just stressing our body. We are bombarding our body all the time. This is a massive amount of stress, and that's stealing energy from our system, stealing electrons and putting it towards the stress mechanism, towards this cortisol elevation. Now, if we're stealing energy from this other systems of the body and it's going towards stress, and the body is trying to keep the stress in check, but we are constantly stressing the body because of those things, because of the stresses, the blue lights and the non-native electromagnetic fields, and also probably psychological stress and food and lack of sleeping and so on. Now our battery, if we think of the body as a battery, is starting to become empty. Now, if we go and exercise, we are now breaking down muscle. If we break down muscle, that obviously is going to need a lot of energy to repair. And we are stealing energy, precious energy, away from the heart and brain. Now, when we steal energy away from the heart and brain, we are at higher risk of things, happening that we don't want to be happening. Absolutely. So if we understand this, if we simply understand this, then we understand why it's so important to be outside as much as possible. That doesn't mean that we need to be in the sun. That doesn't mean that we need to get burned. It just means being outside in the natural environment, being grounded to the earth, so we can harvest electrons instead of being robbed our electrons. So indoors is an electron stealing, electron robbing environment, and outdoors is an electron donor. It's an electron giving environment. So that is what our body uses electrons to produce ATP through our mitochondria. And so basically, when we are outside, we are obviously charging our batteries. We have more energy for cellular repair, apoptosis, autophagy. We have all this energy to be able to function as we should and to have a healthy circadian rhythms. But when we are indoors, then we are messing everything up because we are just robbing and stealing that energy from the body. Now, this is where there is a nuance, right? It's not always bad to exercise in gyms. I even exercise in a gym myself on top of exercising outdoors. The thing is that you need to know what you're doing around that time where you're exercising in the gym. If you're spending the majority of your time outside, like myself, and I'm trying to be outdoors as much as I can, and I'm trying to be grounded as much as I can throughout the day, spending 1 hour in that kind of environment is not going to be that stressful for my body. Yes, it is going to rob me of some electrons. I acknowledge that. I'm aware of that. But it's a trade-off I make because I acknowledge that the gym environment is providing me with some equipment, some things that I don't necessarily have at home. Otherwise, I would train at home. I would train outside if I had that equipment. So it's convenient for me to utilize that environment. So this is what people need to do if they want to utilize gym environments. They have to live a circadian appropriate way. Otherwise, you are putting yourself at great risk of depleting your cellular batteries. And then that puts you at risk for many, many other problems, because we know that actually when the cells don't have energy to do what they're supposed to do, they don't heal, they don't repair, they don't replicate themselves, we don't detoxify, we're not able to sleep efficiently, and so we're not even able to perform well or have good cognitive performance. So it all comes down to energy in versus energy out. We're not talking about calories, we're talking about electrons. So when we talk about electrons, we want to think about charging our body as much as we can while depleting our body from stress.
Absolutely. That's amazing, Andreas. I mean, you just done a big top to bottom in terms of the circadian story and the quantum story, let's be honest. Just to add to that, I mean, the funniest thing that, and definitely you experience this as well, I know that, and certainly I experience it as practitioners, that often when people come to us, and again, this is another sort of plug for our work that we do together, obviously, as our online training corp. If anybody's interested in that, again, please check out the description below to find out more about how we work together and how we help people on the path to health and performance and longevity. But just to add to that usually the people that come to us, they're often looking for a supplement, they're looking for the perfect program, they're looking for the perfect movements. And as you quite rightly said, when you get this quantum approach, the light, the minimizing of these disruptors, these electron stealers from the environment, you start to embrace nature again through grounding. You get the diet side of things right, you get the movement right, you get the piezoelectricity going. Everything else that you layer on starts to actually work properly. And it's funny actually, because again, just to touch on an area of slight controversy, I guess, for some people and some taboo. We had Dave Lee on some episodes ago talking about this area of testosterone replacement therapy. And in that episode, we talked about kind of the pros and cons and the drawbacks of using this, in men, and what it can confer and what it obviously has negative wise. But he did stipulate that all these things around quantum health, nutrition are so vital, because if you don't do that, the drugs don't work. They don't work properly. And we see this all the time, when people come in, why is my medication not working? Why is this not working? Why is my supplement not working? It's because you've got all these disruptors which are stealing from your body's ability to even use these exogenous compounds perfectly. So I just want to emphasize what Andreas is saying. This isn't just a nice to have. it's not biohacking. You don't just whack up a panel and do a bit of red light. Yes, these
It's
things
fundamental.
It's fundamental. It's how we have existed for millions of years, and so we have to do it. And one other thing I think that's also something that we've done for millions of years is that we've run after things. Whether it's hunting down an animal, chasing down our brethren across the savannah, sprinting. Sprinting is something that I've seen you do quite a few times on your Instagram channel. I've seen it start to gain popularity. It's certainly something I used to love when I was at school, and I still love doing. There's nothing more kind of, I think, I don't know, like animalistic, primal, whatever you want to call it, than sprinting at full speed. Talk to us about sprinting, pros, cons. Why is it important for people to think about maybe incorporating sprinting into their routine if they don't already do so?
So I like to think of sprinting as the ultimate human movement. And the reason being is that we actually have evolved to walk, run, and sprint. That is literally what we are designed to do. That's why we walk. That's how we locomote from one place to another. So if our fundamental basic function is designed to do that, that means that sprinting is the ultimate human movement for muscle building, fat loss, optimal muscle function, tensegrity, having the right tension in the right places of the body, because this is where we experience the most aches and pains in our daily life when we want to do what we want to do, just be humans, and we have aches and pains, where it's with standing, walking, or or running or sprinting. If we have aches and pains in those areas, it's because we have lost our human function. And our basic human function is to actually walk, run, and crawl and sprint. And this is why I talk a lot about and do practice a lot of crawling as well, because crawling is basically just walking on the ground. And that's what we did when we were children. That programs the nervous system how to operate with opposite hand to opposite leg, right? So when you walk and run, you always swing your opposite hand across to your opposite knee. And that's actually how you maintain balance to locomote. And so this is also mobilizing the spinal engine. So the spinal engine is the idea that the spine is actually an engine, and just from the movement of the spine, we are able to produce efficient movement with the least amount of effort. And so basically when we sprint, think of it as a form of resistance training, but with your body. And so when you go as hard as you can, what is sprinting actually? Sprinting is just a faster version of running. And then and then running is a faster version of walking, and walking is a faster version of crawling. And so there's this like evolution, if you think about it, from child to adult, and then towards optimal athlete, towards, the most athletic ability that you have, which is when you like supposedly mature and you reach your height. And it's supposed to keep on improving for a lifetime. It's not supposed to degenerate. And this is why we need to carry on moving throughout a lifetime. Otherwise, we use the function. The term use it or lose it is very real. And so only because we stop doing something, that is why we become stiff. That is why we lose the function. That's why we lose the ability to sprint, to walk, and to run. And so this is why we need to now do mobility exercises to try and regain our mobility back, because we stopped doing those things at a younger age, And a lot of that, I believe, is due to the fact that we sit in schools all day when we are children. We sit many, 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 many hours, and that is setting our body into this sort of configuration of this L shape, of keeping the hip flexor very restricted. We are minimizing the blood flow to the brain. We are not, we are becoming very stagnant. And so now that is making us very tight as we go into adulthood. And we continue that even into university. And, it gets worse and worse if we have a sedentary job. So I just want to go back to the sprinting so we don't forget. When we sprint, right, you are using every single muscle in your body, especially when you're going as hard as you can, because you are going against the air, but you're going also against gravity, which is constantly pushing down. And you will know that you are going as hard as you can because you literally feel your limbs after a certain point, they start to slow down so much because you are tapping into anaerobic metabolism. And when you tap into anaerobic metabolism, means your muscles now don't have the oxygen. And so now we are utilizing all of the glucose that we have stored in our muscles, right? We are depleting our body of the glycogen stores. So that's incredible for that. So it's actually helping our insulin, right? It's improving, taking the burden of our insulin by sucking all the glucose into the utilization, and also increasing our beta oxidation afterwards, which is the fat utilization. Because once we finish the activity, now our body has to restock those glycogen stores.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, it is literally the ultimate human movement, because it gives you strength, it gives you power, it gives you endurance, it gives you mobility, it gives you, it makes your mind sharp, it makes you very alert, and you feel extremely present in your body.
That's really, really interesting, and I completely, I completely relate to that. That kind of amazing feeling that you get when you're working at that kind of 90% plus, threshold. You can't possibly work any harder, and there's nothing more exhilarating than getting through that kind of, that moment and feeling the feeling on the other side of it. A couple of things I wanted to ask you though, Andreas, just for your expertise, is one thing that we had on the previous episode of the podcast was we had Dr. Stephen Hussey, who came to us to talk about the heart, and one of the things that he talked about in that episode was he mentioned the same thing as you, that he feels that sprinting and resistance exercise are actually the best things that you can possibly do for total heart health long term. And he used the analogy that, like, quite a few years ago, so we're talking about the 1990s and prior to that, there was this movement towards the born to run generation. We're born to run. I think there was a movie that might have been around that particular topic, although I've never seen it, but I know the phrase. And he said that, again, a similar sort of thing, that we're not really designed to do that. So would you say that with this kind of resurgence of kind of, hybrid training, let's call it, I see a lot of these influencers online who are talking about strength training with running and doing marathons and also powerlifting and things like that. If you like running, for instance, like you enjoy going for a run, or you're part of a run club, is it detrimental to continue that, in your opinion, or is it about balancing it somewhere? And also, if there is a balance, where do you draw the line in terms of the running?
I see. So are you talking about someone who is like a runner who does it consistently, or just someone who runs like once per week?
Let's take both. So let's start with somebody who runs a lot. What advice would you give to them? And then somebody who maybe runs like once a week, let's say 5K, they just go for a bit of a short run. What advice would you give to them? Can they continue their running?
I believe running is truly an incredible thing, especially when it comes to the mitochondrial function. When we understand how, when we do endurance sports, this medium intensity level of resistance, so whether that is biking, cycling, running, or swimming, we are now hitting that point in our mitochondrial function where we are utilizing fatty acids as a form of energy. And now we are becoming extremely efficient with our movement, and we are not fatiguing, but we feel like we can go on forever. Okay. This is great, but at the same time, not so great, because the body doesn't necessarily want to use the fat that it has stored on the body, right? And it wants to actually preserve the body fat. And so if we are doing this a lot, then we are also taxing our system a lot, specifically the joints and the ligaments, especially if we are doing long distances. And this is where it starts to become a bit of an issue for somebody who is doing it all the time. And now, because we have the invention of the shoe, and we can wear cushioned shoes, and we can now defy the pain that we would feel normally if we were barefoot running. That allows us to run longer distances, and then that places a lot of load on and stress on our joints, causing stress fractures and under recovering and stuff like that. And so the body doesn't necessarily want to do things for such a long period of time. It likes short bursts of exercise. And I'm a very big believer in mini workouts. So if you don't have time to do like a full-on workout, like a 1-hour workout, I'm a big believer in doing, let's say, pull-ups, 3 sets all out to failure, and then not doing anything else for the rest of the day. And then again, doing a couple more in the afternoon, and then maybe a couple of more. So throughout the day, you spread out your workout, but you still get your workout in. So in total, the amount of sets that you've accumulated across the day is still the same as if you would do it in the same workout. And probably you'd get better performance for those sets as well, because you are not fully fatigued due to the not doing 9 to 15 sets altogether, rather than it being more spread out. And so the same thing with running, I just don't think that it's the most healthiest thing to do, because it's a very modern thing to exercise anyway, because before we only moved to hunt and gather our food. That was the reason why we moved, and we sprinted, and either we walked or we sprinted, and we only run when we had to get from one place to another place before dark, so we could get as far as we can. But it wasn't like the preferred mechanism of transportation, of locomotion. The walking is the preferred, because it's the most energy efficient state, where you use the least amount of energy, but you can do the most amount.
Yes, I see what you mean. So it sounds like, from what you're saying, that if you're in that kind of upper end, of running, you've got to make that call yourself. It's probably not beneficial for you long term to do this, but if it's something that you love, no amount of us telling you is necessarily going to stop you. But just know that it's not all roses and petals. It's going to be, there are complications down the road, and this is certainly something I see in the hospital. People coming in after decades of doing Ironman, triathlons, marathons, etc., and they've got various different injuries, in the lower body or in the back, just from that pounding, as you say, and not having that kind of, I guess, feedback from the floor, that you would get if you were doing barefoot running, of like, my joints have had enough. And I certainly say, like, after we spoke to, we talked about barefoot training with one of my previous guests on the podcast, that when I transferred to barefoot shoes, for the short amount of running that I do, that really made a difference to my own kind of endurance training. Because I do think there is some benefit to doing so, as you said, for aerobic benefits, cardiorespiratory benefits, maybe even mitochondrial benefits, but not going excessive, and certainly not doing it without that kind of feedback. And then the last thing I wanted just to ask you about sprinting is that if somebody's never done this before, and they're thinking, okay, Andreas has done something here, this sounds really exciting, I'd like to try it. Are there any kind of first principles that you would say to somebody, this is what you should do absolutely to avoid injury? Because obviously, if you're working at near maximal intensity, there's a high risk of injury.
There is a very high risk of injury. If someone who is untrained and goes and does that now, they would probably pull a muscle or tendon or something. See that all the time in people who are overtrained on the other end of the spectrum, like athletes, how they tear their calves. And
can I tell you when? It's at the dad's race at the school sports day. That's when you see those injuries. Dads who've been in the office for months, then they get up to the 100-meter line. They feel like they're going to show off, and then they go all out, and all you just see is like 5 of them go, oh, my hamstring, and it's a mess. It's a mess.
It's a little bit like sad for it to go that way, because it can take some time to recover as well, especially if you're somebody who enjoys to exercise, and then it puts you off exercise entirely, and then now you have to just sit and do nothing, or you have to be more sedentary than what you're used to. But of course, that comes a lot down to when you just said the person who works in an office under blue light is, their tissues are less pliable, they're more dehydrated. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So I'll leave that for another time, because that has to do with mitochondrial health and, real hydration. Talking about, I lost my train of thought now. What was the question?
How to make sprinting safe?
Yeah, so sprinting, basically the easiest way to know if you're ready to sprint or not is a lot to do with how you breathe. So this might be a little bit shocking to think about this way, but when you understand that if you are a nasal breather, your body is telling you what is your actual limit, what is your threshold. If you feel like your body wants to open the mouth because you feel like you're not getting enough air, that means you're putting the nervous system under too much stress. And so like the nose is a mechanism to put a cap on the amount that you should be pushing yourself. So if you overexert now, it's not a problem if you want to push yourself, but if you're untrained and you're not used to that, and then now you're mouth breathing, and most people are mouth breathing anyway, then basically now you're overriding the body's nervous system, and now you're going into nervous system override, and you are fully stressing the system out. Now all the tissues are starting to tighten up even more. We have a massive release of cortisol because of upper respiratory breathing. And so one thing which I tell people is that, if you want to start sprinting, first you need to start with the basics. You need to walk well before you run. Before you sprint, you need to run well. You need to be a good runner. You need to know how your feet are landing in front of you. Is your head shifting side to side, which it should be during every single step. It shouldn't be stiff and neutral in the center, because this is something that is being taught and believed, that we have to be stiff and neutral when we run, when in reality our head should be shifting side to side over the foot that it lands. And this gives us greater balance due to the fact that our center of mass now is over the standing leg and is not falling there where there is no base of support. And so now all the muscles are taking the tension as they should. It's not placing extra tension on the inside, let's say, of the knee, the medial side, or your ankles, and your knee is not valgating in, so falling inwards. And this can happen very, very often if you are stiff and neutral in the center, but your legs are going left and right, but your head is not shifting with your legs. So you need to pay attention to a couple of things, right? You need to pay attention to your breathing. You need to be a nasal breather in daily life in general as much as you can. This helps your sleep, also helps your performance. It helps to tell you if you're prepared to do a higher output activity. If your body feels like you want to open your mouth, that means that is your limit. That's it. Yeah, you can't push yourself anymore. That's as fast as you go, where your body allows you to. So if you start to improve your capacity, your CO2 tolerance, your carbon dioxide tolerance, basically then that is allowing you to absorb more oxygen. You're becoming more efficient in your mitochondria. Now your endurance is improving, your strength is improving. And so now you'll be able to still nasal breathe, but go faster. And so this is all happening over time, and it takes practice, and it's all about being consistent. It's not going to happen if you do it only like once every couple of weeks. You have to take a consistent regimen and a routine and implement it into your routine if you actually want to get better at sprinting. So this is consistency and programming is very, very, very important. But I wouldn't advise anybody to just go out and sprint without the help of a coach.
Absolutely. And because, as you say, it's technique, there is preparedness that you need to do, conditioning the joints, even just learning how to do it, as you say, like actually running that race. And as I said, giving that slightly humorous example of the dads, I mean, it's a perfect example of not to do that. So if you don't want to end up with an injury, contacting Andreas and myself, to help you is probably the way forward. And I can say also on the nasal breathing side of things that Andreas was the first person to really sort of emphasize that to me, actually. And I can say whenever I go for my runs, which again are probably no longer than anywhere between 5 and 10K really, this really does help you regulate your pace. I would regularly, because I'm very used to pushing myself from years of sparring and hard martial arts training. But if you breathe through the nose, you have to slow down. There's just no way you can go necessarily at your previous pace if you were mouth breathing. And that's what I noticed straight away. And that I came back and I was better recovered. I was more refreshed and I could pace myself better. So that was it. So thank you, Andreas. That was an amazing bit of insight there. And then I guess moving on to probably what I would call like the latter part of the conversation today, and the last question really is, one thing that I've noticed a lot from your training methodology and your Instagram page is this area of unconventional training. I love like seeing your workouts. They're so cool, with different bits of equipment like maces, clubs, kettlebells, different amazing movement patterns. Other than it looking really cool, there's probably going to be some skeptics in the listening audience thinking, well, that looks great for Instagram, but is there any benefit of doing this to say my goals for say hypertrophy or for my sport or whatever? How do you integrate unconventional training into a regular program, and what benefits does it have?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what your goals are, right? So, for example, if your goal is hypertrophy, it's probably not the most ideal way to train, because you cannot necessarily progressively overload as easy in those exercises as you could in a gym environment, where you could increase by 2 kilos every week, or add an extra rep, or increase your time under tension, or whatever other methodology you use to progressively overload the body. These exercises are focused mainly on function of the body, and that is why I do them and why I implement them in my clients' programs as well. So that doesn't have to be using tools. You don't have to be using kettlebells or maces, but you can also use your own body weight, like calisthenic exercises or animal movements, primal movements, which I also, show on my page. And so the aim is to actually focus on function of the body, on different areas, how the body is working together as a unit, and to feel your body, to be aware with your body. Many times when we are exercising, we are just pushing ourselves a lot, and we are trying to grow that muscle, and we are doing isolation exercises, and we are, yes, and that's fantastic for muscle hypertrophy, but we are not like treating the body as a system. And the body is a system, right? And that goes back to exactly what I was saying about the sprints. It's the exact same thing. You can do that with many other exercises where human is designed to be able to do. And there is a reason why we can do certain movement patterns. Literally, have you ever thought about the fact that the body is very spherical in different areas, right? So we have like all these spheres, or we are sort of spiral, all our joints are circular. Like, why is that? It's because we are designed for rotation, right? We are designed to be able to move in all directions at any moment. And so if we are designed to be able to do that, that means that we need to also train that, because now we have a more sedentary lifestyle, because now we do mainly isolation work and we don't do so much functional work. Our body becomes stiffer and stiffer and less mobile, less functional. And the beautiful thing about doing this type of exercises is that you can, through an external tool like a mace or a kettlebell or even your body weight, you can actually train your function and your mobility and your endurance all at the same time. And sure, you can even achieve some hypertrophy benefits too, if you know how to program progressive overload, which is extremely easy, to be honest. If you have, just heavier weights of a certain tool, or you do more repetitions with your body weight. But of course, you're going to hit a wall at some point. But, until you hit that wall, you are going to make massive benefits, and you're going to probably build quite a decent physique as well.
Absolutely. And I think, if I was, maybe being slightly harsh on the runners beforehand, I'm now going to be slightly harsh on the bodybuilders right now, is that, something that I commonly see, and certainly you do, I'm sure as well, Andreas, is that when people get hyper specialized in one area, as you say, we neglect the basic function of the human body, which you say is to be able to move in all directions at any given moment. And when you lose that capability, there is going to be consequences to that. And I think never losing sight of the fact that whenever you choose to go off down a rabbit hole into one speciality, you are going to lose your general ability. And that's just part and parcel of that. I don't think you necessarily need to sacrifice, movement, your ability to perform in daily life, because some may argue with me about this, but I don't really think there's any benefit to having an amazing set of muscles if you're constantly stiff and injured all the time and have the mobility of a wooden board, and you don't feel good, you can't move. At the end of the day. And I think this is the problem I think sometimes we face in the fitness community, is that people are, yes, it's good to focus. It's good to have a primary thing that you're aiming for, whether that's building more muscle tissue, whether that's improving your run time, but then not losing the kind of the humanistic element that we have of our bodies, which is to be able to move, in all directions. So
absolutely.
That's so good. Any kind of final bits of wisdom or parting advice you want to give to the listeners as we close out for today, Andreas? And how can people find you, obviously?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so what I wanted to say on that, what you just said, was that what I like to do is how I like to observe fitness is I don't like to put any form of training, modality, or part of fitness down, due to the fact that everything has its value and place, just like stretching does at some points. It just depends all about context. So I extract from every single specialty or domain what is most valuable to me as a coach, and I implement that into my lifestyle and also to that of my clients into the programming. So there is no one size fits all, and there is no training modality which is better than another. And this is something very common which I see in the fitness industry, where they bash one system over another, and they say that functional patterns is the best form of exercise because it focuses on function, and this is the only way to train. Bodybuilding is sucks, and all these other kind of things. It's not like that. It's like the same thing. Bodybuilders say the same thing about the functional people. And, you know, you can hear it in different communities. In every single community which becomes cult-like, they have their downsides where they see very narrow-minded. And we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to be open-minded, and we want to extract what's useful from every single one and see how does that feel to us, to our body. You know, and so this is the way forward for us to be able to progress and to not, you know, build like a dogmatic mindset where we see things just black and white, because it's not black and white. You know, for example, I hear a lot of people saying that if you're big and muscular, you can't move well or you can't be functional. And that's absolutely not true. Like, I would say that I'm not a small guy when it comes to, you know, muscle size. I bodybuild in the gym. I do also powerlifting style exercises. And I do unconventional exercises. So I incorporate a little bit of everything, you know, because I feel that there is value in everything. I value being strong in big lifts. I value in hypertrophying my muscles because I like looking good. I like my insulin sensitivities to be good. You know, there's so many benefits to acquiring more muscle, but I also respect and appreciate the function of the human body. And after all, I am a movement specialist. So I have to be able to do if I'm preaching that, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it sounds like the parting comment is, as you say, to be a bit more Bruce Lee, and that you extract what's useful and you disregard which is not. And I think on that note, we will definitely have all the links to Andreas's profile in the description below. And as I said right at the beginning, please tune in for another episode, and we look forward to having Andreas back another time.